as opposed to, oh, the system is horrible and I have to now destroy the system, as if they could magically reconstitute a system that really would just be, in effect, throwing away thousands of years of human history, that they're so wise. They're so wise at 24 years old as they're shouting down speakers that they could build up what nobody before them could. And that's the danger there. So I think getting them to think about their own lives, where they come from, I think is a pretty effective way of getting through to people.
Well, we could also say, like, look, there's a claim that the West is an oppressive patriarchy. And so that's actually true. The problem with the claim is that it's not just an oppressive patriarchy. And there's a big difference between something being completely something and something being partly something. Because one of the things you might point out is that you can look at human history anywhere, and what you see is a complete bloody nightmare, right? It's death and struggle and privation and war and horror everywhere, with some progress, you know, some ability of us to pull ourselves out of the mire, you know, and the West is the same. There's plenty of catastrophe in our past, and of all sorts, and I think it's necessary to know that. But then it's necessary to separate the wheat from the chaff. You know, one of the things I see with readers who are unsophisticated and intellectually arrogant is they'll read someone great. Maybe they'll read Nietzsche, for example, and they'll find the odd thing that Nietzsche said that grates against their current moral sensibilities, whether they do that in context or out. And then they'll throw away the whole book. It's like, you don't throw away the whole book. It was Nietzsche. You don't throw away the book. He's like 1 in a billion. You read it carefully and you think, well, okay, no to that. But yes to this. And you do the same thing with Dostoevsky, and you do the same thing with Tolstoy. You do the same thing with the great writers of the past that have been passed down to us. You read intelligently. You separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And you gain wisdom that way. Well, you do the same when you look at your own history. It's like, well, of course it's a bloody nightmare. What do you expect? It's like, what's your point? We're going to burn it down and then we're going to have something better as a consequence? Well, not so easily, not so quickly. Maybe we read our history carefully and we think, okay, well, what did we get right? Well, what did we get right? Well, the sovereignty of the individual, that's pretty good. The fact that you have right to property, that's pretty good. You can argue about the limits on that, but you know, you don't want someone just taking your purse. You know, it's helpful that there are things that you can earn and own. You know, the dignity of the individual, that's another one. The innocence before the law, God, that's a miracle that we ever came up with that idea. I can't believe that idea exists, because in most cultures it's like, well, you might be guilty, okay, you're dead. Because, well, that's easier, you might be guilty, you know, why go through all the trouble? There's plenty of people where you came from. It's like the trouble of presuming your innocence. It's innocent. It's even hard for you to do that for yourself. And the idea that each person has an intrinsic worth regardless of their, well, externalities, let's say. That's another idea that's a complete miracle. It's like, what are we going to do? We're going to throw all that away with the statement that we live in an oppressive patriarchy. And then we're going to be left with nothing. And what good is that? Well, how about we look at our history and we take responsibility for it? We think, okay, well, here's some things that need to be fixed. There's plenty of them, right? There's plenty of them for each of us to fix. And we'll go fix them. And maybe then we can atone for the bloodiness of our history and for our so-called unearned privilege, you know, some of which all of us have. And that would be good. That would be part of the adventure of your life too. And that's a far more sensible and wise approach to the diagnosis of what's wrong with the West than, well, it's an oppressive patriarchy and it should be overthrown, or whatever that, you know, current low resolution and resentful ideology happens to be. And there's something to be said for a bit of humility as well. Mm-hmm. It's like, really, you really think that you're capable of making large-scale social transformations and getting it right, do you? You really think that? You're 25, you're 30, you're 40, I don't care, you know. What makes you think you're smart enough to pull off something like that? It's very, very difficult. Very, very, very difficult to take a system that works not too badly and to do anything to it that doesn't make it worse, much less to radically reconstitute it and make it better. That's really hard. So, you know, if you're upset about your culture, well, maybe you could think of some small ways that are local that you could go out and improve it. I think you should start with yourself, because, well, then you're only harming yourself and you're not a bad person to practice on. And then you could extend that to your family. Well, at least you suffer for the consequences of your own experiments that way, rather than having someone else do it. And then maybe you can work on bringing a little more harmony into your family. And maybe you can get a job and see if you're any good at that. And then if you manage those three things halfways respectably, well, then you could dare to put a toehold out into the broader community and think, maybe I have an idea here that we could tentatively attempt that might make some small thing slightly better that we could measure carefully and assess. And that would be your contribution. And maybe you get real good at that, you know. So by the time you're 50 or 60 and you have a solid life behind you, you're actually capable of generating large-scale improvements carefully.
You know, as you were saying that, I was thinking, I mean, this is exactly what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is. I mean, this is a bartender with a 430 credit score, which is pretty terrible. But all she's ever done in her life has been a bartender. Now, that's fine. I've been a bartender at times. But her only accomplishment is becoming a congresswoman with, I think, around 15,000 votes by saying the exact thing that the media wants you to say all the time, right? The idea that she could write this Green New Deal and that somehow she is the one that can, now, of course, she didn't really write it. You know, we don't know who really wrote it. But the idea that she could present this as if she has the ideas that could rejigger the entire United States economy and how we deal with energy and transportation and everything, and we're not going to have planes, and we're going to pay people unwilling to work, although then she deleted that part and put that, you know. It's like, it's the lack of humility there that's actually staggering, that she thinks no one before her might have tried to move some of these things on the margins a little bit. But the crazy part...
Or that moving things on the margins isn't enough.
Well, they don't believe it's enough, but the really crazy part of this is that pretty much, I think the 5 or 6 Democratic candidates that we have now have all basically signed on board this thing.
Yeah.
This thing, which is I think you could probably argue that it's unconstitutional on the grounds of it's just taking more for the government.
But it defies everything we know from history about how economics really
Yeah.
works.
Well, she's
It's
admitted you can't
complete
pay for
denial
it.
of history.
Yeah. She says we'll tax the billionaires, and then she also tells you that the billionaires are the blight on society. So it's like, well, which one is it? Because you need the billionaires to pay for it, even though it won't pay for it. And if you don't want billionaires, well, now we can't pay for it. So what are we doing? give me one.
Australia's longest-serving Prime Minister was a man called Bob Menzies. And he was a man of incredibly powerful intellect and very, very deep learning. And he wrote, fascinatingly, that democracy is not a machine, it's a spirit, in which the peculiar Christian conception that no matter what your station in life is, each of us has a spark of the divine and every soul is of equal value before heaven. Why do I mention that? Partly because I think it's a very relevant point personally, but it's because in the mocking and the ridiculing of that respect for our faith out of the door, we've knocked out one of the pillars of democracy. We've knocked out the idea that whether I agree with you or not doesn't matter. I have to respect you because a higher authority places as much value on you as he does on me. Now it seems that the problem is that if you dare disagree with me, I don't have a reference frame for good and bad anymore or for respecting you. Therefore, I have to insist I'm right. See, I'm God over my life, and you dare to challenge me because you want to be God over yours.
Well, that's the
So
problem.
you're an evil person or you're a racist or you're something terrible. We lack a framework for respecting one another. And it seems a massive problem for us.
Well, it's the problem with the collectivist viewpoint. Because if your defining characteristic is that you're a member of a collective, then you live or die by the propriety of the collective. The antidote to that is that strange metaphysical claim, which is that Well, which is fundamentally that we each have a spark of the divine in us. And you think, well, it's easy to be cynical about that. But you shouldn't be. Because you act like it's true. And that's worth noticing. It's like if you have friends or family members and you don't treat them like they have profound intrinsic value, then they're not happy with you. Right? You can't have a loving relationship without that. You can't have a relationship of reciprocity without that. You can't have a relationship of respect without that. None of it. And they also want you to treat them like they're, in some sense, masters of their own destiny, which is also interesting, right? Because if you have say a 21-year-old child, and they're upset with you, they say, well, I'm 21 years old, I'm able to make my own decisions. And you say, and they want you to agree with that, and you want to agree with it because you hope that they are ready to make their own decisions. And you think, well, maybe they have matured to that point. So what are you saying? Well, you're saying that they are gifted with the ability to take the responsibility to shape the reality around them. And they insist upon that. They insist upon you recognizing that in them as a hallmark of respect and love. And you might be irritated because they're not acting responsibly enough to deserve that, but it's still what you hope for and want. And so well, so what is it? We're the sovereign cornerstone of the state, each of us. Are we going to dispute that? Well, we know the cost of that. Okay, well, do we have that spark of divinity? Well, what do we struggle with day to day? We struggle with the potential that's in front of us and transforming that into the reality that could be. That's as close to a divine faculty as anything I can think of. It's completely mysterious that we can wrestle with the fabric of becoming and turn it into the actuality of being. And that we seem to do that as a consequence of our ethical choices, right? You make bad choices, you think they're bad things happen, right? And you think they're bad, and so you took the potential that was there in front of you, and you made something bad of it. You can do that, and you can also do what's good. And we know that of each other, and that's part of the reason that we're granted, let's say, the right and the responsibility of being the cornerstone of the state. And so the idea that there is that divinity in us, I think that's associated with our consciousness, whatever that is. Because consciousness is a mystery. It seems to give reality to being, right? What's being without consciousness? There's no one there to perceive anything. There's no one there to shape anything. It's like, is there anything there? Well, our consciousness itself seems to be what participates in the reality of being and the transformation of potential into actuality, for better or no reason for us to be questioning this fundamental assumption unless we think we have a better theory. And what is that? Well, it's your race. It's your power structure. It's like, that's what you want? You want to be judged by collective standards? It doesn't matter what you did. It's in this foreword I wrote for the Solzhenitsyn book. The people who ran the magazine Red Terror, that's a hell of a magazine, Red Terror. So they said, well, look, if you're getting rid of the bourgeoisie, don't just be stopping with the people who own businesses. You want to get rid of their children, too, because they're infected with the same damn evil spirit. And just to be on the safe side, how about you take out the grandchildren, too? 6-year-old, 10-year-old, doesn't matter. Everyone goes. And what happened in the Soviet Union, everyone judged on their collective identity, right? That's how you're going to be judged. I'll find something about your collective identity that's not so positive, right? Some manner in which, regardless of how oppressed you are, you're also an oppressor. For you, it might be you're male. Well, that would do it, For you, it might be that you're middle class. I can find some dimension of your multiple collective identities on which you're an oppressor. And that's good enough to do you in if you take the collectivist route. And the alternative to that is no. We have that spark of divinity. It's associated with a deep, deep responsibility. And the ability that goes along with that. And we play that out all the time. We play it out every time we play fair games with one another. We have decent, honest relationships with one another. We have business arrangements that are honest and work, and we can cooperate for long periods of time. We take care of our children properly. We take care of our old people properly. It's all predicated on the same thing. You have intrinsic value. And even if you do something terrible, let's say, and I still have the conviction that you have value, then it's incumbent on me to say, well, you did something terrible, but you aren't necessarily something terrible. And it might be possible for you to shed that and to atone and to rejoin those who are good. And that's something too, and that's built deeply into our political and economic and justice systems. And it's no time to be abandoning this, you know, especially when you look around the world, you see as it's spreading, and it's spreading quite rapidly. Everywhere it's spreading, things are getting way better. So enough crisis of confidence in the West. Like, we've got our house to put in order. There's no doubt about that. But I see no reason why we can't do it unless we lose faith in ourselves. And there's reason for that. Like, life is brutal. There's reason to lose faith. But not in the final analysis. It's a mark of malevolence and cowardice to lose faith. So
the inherent problem with that, though, or just very briefly, is that the people that are promoting these ideas, they actually believe that the experiment of freedom, which is all that it is, they believe it is bad. They believe that America is bad, that the freedoms that you've won here are bad. And what's interesting is I've seen such a massive, look, I was a lefty my entire life.
You were?
And yeah, and
What
I should be judged accordingly. But I mean, look, what I see now is, look, I could sit up here and give you my lefty cred, right? So I'm gay, married, I'm begrudgingly pro-choice, although I'm really struggling with that one lately because the left has now, especially in America, gone so bananas on the abortion issue.
It really has gone bananas.
Completely crazy. I mean, they're quite literally talking about post-birth abortions. I mean, it's really nuts. I'm against the death penalty. I'm for reforming the prison systems. I'm for strong public education. I mean, I give you a litany of lefty ideas, right? But I can't get invited anywhere by the left or a Democratic group or anywhere by any of these people. But you know who invites me? The conservatives. And I go up there and I tell them all the reasons I disagree with them. And the libertarians, I mean, I like the libertarians. They're mostly stoned, but like, you know, I'm also pro-pot. But why? If you're conservative, if you're libertarian, if you're a classical liberal or sort of a disaffected lefty, if you're an independent, and a couple other things, if you're any of those, there's a great group of people right now that are willing to agree to disagree and get to exactly what your question was, which is how do you sit down with people without impugning them? The only people we're talking about at the moment that have any institutional power, because you know, every time you talk about this, someone says, well, but there's 4 white nationalists here and that, and it's like they have no power, no one cares about them. The media promotes them to make it seem like they're massive, and they're not. No one, even the right does a pretty decent job of saying that these people are no good. So all we're really fighting is this hysteric, what was that study in The Atlantic, where it's only something like 8%?
yeah, and
only
and
8%.
about 30% of them think it's gone too far.
So something like 8% of people believe really in this postmodern progressive view of the world, and a lot of them are shaky within that belief. So it seems like a big monster because the media is always pushing it on us because they're loud. But I'm extremely enthused that we've gone all over the world and met good people who are I think need to be a little braver perhaps, but are here and are willing to
I want to
fight.
come to that bravery in a moment. What you've just said reminds me of 2 remarkable men in history, G.K. Chesterton and George Bernard Shaw. They disagreed on just about everything you could think of, but they loved each other's company. Now, isn't that incredible? They couldn't wait to be together to have another good argument and a good feed together. That's what we need. The genius of Western harmony surely is lain in our ability to respect one another even over our deepest differences. And one day, Chesterton was huge. He was 6'4" and very, very heavy. George Bernard Shaw was in great shape, like you two fellas. And G.K. Chesterton looked at George Bernard Shaw, slim as a rake, and he said, "By gee, George, you look as though there must be a famine in England." And George Bernard Shaw shot back as quickly as you could imagine, this great big gargantuan man, "And you look like you're the cause of it." But you just mentioned courage, and I want to get to some of the terrific questions that people have put up. Before I do, That courage is something you've both displayed in spadefuls, and it's incredibly important. We live in a culture now where I think there's a lot of fear. When I was last with you, we were at Chatswood, and there's 1,000 people in that auditorium. A lot of them are young men. And I looked around and I thought, these are terrific young Australians. They're pretty concerned about whether their masculinity might be toxic. And they're pretty fearful about speaking out because, you know, we had, once upon a time, we used to burn people at the stake, didn't we? And then we went for the guillotine, then we went for the hangman's noose. Now we kill people in social media. And we do. People get kneecapped every day and worse. I think we owe you a great debt, both of you actually, because you dared to break the ceiling. And Dave, you actually asked Jordan about this in Norway. This is the beauty of modern, even I've caught up a bit, you know. Heard your conversation. You said, you asked Jordan, did you expect when you started on this journey for it to end up like this? And you asked him what it's like to break through that, you know, how do you feel about it when you're attacked? And you were very open and very honest. And you said it's very tough when a journalist does you over. But you might like to repeat that question to Jordan.
Yeah, well, quickly on the bravery thing, my partner hates when I say this, but I don't consider myself brave. I'm doing what I think is right. That is it. That really is it. I wake up every morning and I feel that I have something to do that's relevant and important, and being on this tour with Jordan has been life-altering, not only for my life, for all the people that show there, but I don't view it as bravery. I couldn't not do it, I guess is the best way to say it. I just got to
make the point there. I think you're probably being very tough on yourself. I think the reality is that courage is not so much not knowing fear, it's overcoming it, isn't it? And there must have been times when you wanted to sort of say, gee, I don't want to be under this attack.
Well, I guess I saw enough when I started waking up to some of what was going on the left, and I had seen the tactics over and over and how they destroyed good people. I suppose that as that went on and as I woke up and got out of it, I just became numb to that, and I just wouldn't live like that, I would think. But the question that I asked you in Norway, in effect, was you didn't set out for this when C16 came around. You know, you were doing all sorts of other things. You had a practice, you were teaching, all of these other things, and yet you've survived these, it's not even the attacks, you've survived a road that you didn't plan on being on, and the bravery that you've shown along the way is why people keep coming back. They're rooting for us more. As you often say, it's like these hit pieces come out, and then in a weird way, and now I see it with me, they've moved on from you, by the way, they're working on me now. But
Good.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. But in a weird way, it wasn't that you reveled in it, but you made a point of saying, look, every time they do it, I'm still here. And I think it really took me a while to understand that, because I always wanted, you know, I wanted to defend my friends, but I also wanted to defend myself. And now it's like, all right, keep coming. I'm still here. We must be doing something right, because I don't spend all my day attacking other people. I'll gladly attack ideas, but I don't attack people. I mean, I don't think we've done anything up here where we attacked a singular person, right? And that's a huge difference. So the question really was, you inadvertently, in a weird way.
Cortez.
I'm not a big fan of Cortez. Okay, fine, fair enough. Yeah, exactly. So every now and again, though, but I think I talked about her ideas and not her.
Talking about her ideas.
She's in the public sphere.
Yeah, I talked about her and her credit score, but you know, not her as a person. But right, and she is in the public sphere, and it's also impossible to never talk about people. So it's you can't be that lofty all the time, but you can try to be a little bit. But that basically you inadvertently ended up in this position where now, by virtue of showing bravery, well, you sold out the Sydney Opera House in 5 minutes. Pretty sweet.
Well, it's a matter, I think it's a matter of being afraid of the right thing. That's the issue. It's like I decided a long time ago, partly from reading Solzhenitsyn, that I was going to try to be very careful with my words, and I was only going to say things that I thought, well, to begin with, weren't lies, let's say. I was going to try to formulate my thoughts truthfully. And the reason I decided that was because I thought that the opposite was hellishly dangerous. And I really believe that. I truly believe that. And so if I say things and I think they're true and they get me in trouble, then I think, well, that's not as much trouble as I would have got into if I would have said something that wasn't true. Like, it might be more trouble right now. Who knows, right? Because, and you don't know how these things are going to turn out. I had this interview, most of you know about it, with Kathy Newman from Channel 4, right? And that was a pretty strange experience.
So what you're saying is it was a great interview.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, she was pretty professional when we went to the studio, like someone like that is professional, kind of hard surface and glossy and media presentable, you know, the TV turns you into that. And she was perfectly polite in a professional way until the camera went on, and then, you know, and then she went after me. And then the whole interview went the way it went, and I thought, I had like 20 interviews that day, and so I walked away from that, and I thought, oh God, they're going to take 7 minutes of that and, you know, broadcast it and make me look like a complete monster, and that'll be the end of that. And that is exactly what they did, except they also posted the entire thing on YouTube, not knowing at all that it was a train wreck. They had no idea. It wasn't like they thought, oh, well, this is a train wreck, we better put it on YouTube. It wasn't that at all. They thought it was a perfectly fine interview. So then it went on YouTube. And so, like, my mood changed a lot. It was, first of all, well, this interview went catastrophically, and then it was, well, they're only going to use 7 minutes of it, and that's going to be a drag, but I'll probably get over it. And then they put it online, and then there was just an incredible reaction. And then 5, 10 newspapers came out to play the victim card for poor Kathy, which was now all the online trolls were after her. And I thought, that really, really struck me. I thought, she's one of the most powerful people in the UK. You know, one of the 1,000 most powerful, let's say, or the 500 most powerful. She's no bloody victim. And she's paid plenty well for what she does.
And Jordan, by the way, don't forget that that night that this all happened, she did a video in her car reading the comments by the trolls, because at that moment she didn't realize she should play the victim card yet.
Yes, that's right.
She was still reveling in it.
That's right.
And it wasn't until she realized it that.
Yeah. And so then her employees said, well, we had to call in the police to investigate. Because that's an unbelievably crooked thing to say. It's like anybody can call in the damn police to investigate anything. It's like, well, what constitutes a credible threat? Well, there are ways of assessing credible threats. You know, they have to be direct and detailed. That's how you assess suicidality, for example. If you tell me that you have a plan, you know when you're going to do it, you know where, you have a gun, you've thought it through, it's like, that's a credible threat. Sometimes I wish I wasn't here, that's not a credible threat. And you see the same sort of thing online. Well, then 10 newspapers played the victim card that poor Kathy was being trolled by, well, at that point, by like 1 million trolls. Who knew there were that many trolls? But apparently they were. And then I thought, well, God, the whole thing's going to go sideways again, because I'm going to come out of this as the villain who called forth, you know, the alt-right armada to take down poor, innocent Kathy Newman. And so it looked like it was going to shift that way for about 4 days. And then, well, that didn't work. There was a couple of other interviews that started to push back that narrative, and then it switched back to my side. But look, I'm making a point with this, is when I do an interview, like this interview, I follow this rule in my book, which is it?
Let's say
I think
8.
it's 8.
Oh,
It is
oh,
8.
all right. We've
No,
been doing this for a while.
Sorry, it's 7.
Oh,
do
well.
what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Okay, so I come to an event like this, and I have an opportunity to say things, and I don't come in here and think, okay, here's a bunch of things I want to convince you of. You know, I don't care if you're convinced. It's not like I don't care about you, you know, in the sense that you care for people and hope the best for them, but I don't care if you're convinced. That's not what I'm here for. What I'm here for is to hear the questions and try to figure out what I think about them, and then to say that, and then to see what happens. Like, who the hell knows what's going to happen? But if the world is properly constituted through truth, then faith is the willingness to have faith in truth. And so then you say what you believe to be true. And then some things happen. And sometimes they're not so good, which is why people often lie. You know, you tell the truth, you get in trouble for it. Every kid knows that. It's like, well, why'd you lie? Because I thought I'd get in trouble. Well, obviously. It's like, well, that's not a good long-term strategy. It's like, so you say what you believe to be the truth, and then you have the faith that no matter what happens, if you've said what you believe to be truth, whatever happens is the best thing that could have happened. And I believe that. I think that's how the world's constituted. And so it's not bravery, exactly. I would say it's more like faith. It's like, I'm going to say what I think. I'm going to try to do that as carefully as I possibly can. And I'm going to detach myself from the outcome. Because sometimes the outcome's terrible. I'm at McMaster University or Queen's, and there's like a bloody mob of zombies pounding on the window. You know, it's a little slice of hell. You think, this doesn't seem to be a very good idea. But, you know, the tide turns 2 or 3 times in the next 3 weeks, and something comes out of it. And so if you're going to have faith in truth, it can't just be, well, did I get what I want in the next second? That's not faith. It's like, no, I'm going to, this is the other thing, too, that you got to understand, I think, is that without truth, you don't have the adventure of your life. You see, because if you tell the truth, that means you're revealing your being. That's what you're doing when you're telling the truth. And when you reveal your being, then you're living in the world. You're there, you're present, right? That's being there, let's say. That's you. That's your destiny. That's your journey. That's your adventure. That's what's going to justify your life. The adventure. It's not going to be easy. But if you hide from your truth, well, then you hide from yourself. And then you're not even there. And then who the hell are you? What are you? The puppet. You're the puppet of some coward. You're the puppet of some dictator or some second-rate philosopher, some idiotic idea or a bully you were afraid of in grade 6. God only knows. But it's not you living your life. And then you lose your life. And you lose your soul too. So that's what I'm afraid of. And so, you know, journalists, well, they try to take me down. It's like, yeah, well, that's annoying, and it usually takes me 3 days to recover. But compared to not having my life and not saying what I have to say, that's nothing. It's nothing. It's minor inconvenience. And then generally, if you can just withstand it, you know, 2 weeks, you get mobbed. You guys might all need to know this. You're going to get mobbed on social media. Okay, so what do? Unless you did something wrong. Don't apologize. That's the first thing, because then no one can come to your defense. So don't apologize. Maybe you even double down carefully, not vengefully, right? Carefully. You say, no, that's what I meant. And if you don't like it, too bad. And you get mobbed. Then you apologize, a different mob comes after you. That's not helpful, and no one can defend you. If you can hold out for 2 weeks, you'll win. Now, it's a pretty brutal 2 weeks, because, you know, if you're a reasonable, angry neighbors show up at your door with pitchforks, you might be thinking there's something wrong with you, you know, like you think that unless you're psychopathic. And you think, well, maybe I made a mistake. And it's easy to waver and to back down. And maybe you're also afraid. But, you know, if you scoured your conscience and you're careful and you said what you had to say, then leave it lie. And they'll throw, the people who are playing this game will throw everything they can at you for 2 weeks. And if it doesn't stick, you're done. And then the next time they try it, it doesn't work as well as it did the first time. And by the 50th time they try it, like as far as I can tell, carefully, the people who have enmity for me are out of ammunition. They're done. I read hit pieces now and I think, oh, you just copied the hit piece from 2 months ago. It's like, I'm perfectly habituated to that. They're out of ammunition. And maybe, you know, like someone creative could still come up with some more ammunition. Maybe that'll happen at the Q&A. But it's not bravery, man. It's faith in the redeeming power of truth, and that's different.
I think that's incredibly interesting and encouraging. Let's come to a couple of questions.
Yep.
I'll just preface them by saying we actually did a bit of research on this, and one of the things that people say is they love hearing your stories and they love hearing you being open. and they love it when you connect personally with them. And somebody wanted to connect with you and Tammy. Tammy's here with you, and they're, I think, very conscious of the incredible timetable that you're setting. So is Alistair there? You wanted to ask about how this works for you.
It's so great having the opportunity for both of you in person. In a moment of uncharacteristic courage, close to 2 years ago, I got married. Again, a woman who on any objective measure completely outranks me.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Now, she's very high on assertiveness and I'm very high on conscientiousness, which you will fully understand. And so we contend. We contend a lot, and it's good, and we're going somewhere good. And I'm very proud for what it's worth. I'm aware, and I imagine what your life is like. And I'm talking to you, Jordan, but David, I don't want to exclude you either. And I imagine your life being one of constant exhaustion, exhilaration, and probably a fair bit of terror as well. And the word contending is one that you actually used a few days ago on a different platform in a different city. You were talking to young people, and you challenged them to marry a mate with whom they would contend. And I think of Tammy, and I think of you, and we don't hear a great deal of Tammy, but you guys are, I'm sure, working really hard. You're contending. You're confronting all this stuff and you're processing it. And I'm sure your marriage is strengthening. I trust it is. And I'd love some insight on that if you can speak to what you're learning about marriage in this season of your life.
Well, the first thing we're doing is that Tammy is traveling with me. So that's very helpful. And she's paying attention. You know, so, and we talk a lot about what is going on, but also a lot about our family, because there's complicated things going on in our family like there are in most families. And we do our best to communicate, you know, and she says what she thinks. And I say what I think. And we don't always think the same thing, you know, but we do our best to listen. We do our best to assume that just because the other person has a different opinion doesn't mean that they're wrong, even though it would be lovely if they were. And then we try to come up with a negotiated solution that's mutually acceptable. You know, and we discuss strategy as well. I mean, for example, when we started this tour, which was more than a year ago, we thought, you know, there's a lot of competing things that you could think about a tour, especially when we had no idea how long it would be. Like, what was this? Was this a vacation? We were going to, you know, spectacular cities all over the world. Was it time for us to spend together? Like, what was it? What were we doing? And we spent 2 hours thinking. It's like, no, this is work. We have a remarkable opportunity here. And we're going to do the work. We're going to hit as many cities as we can. And so what does that mean? It means we get the hell up in the morning. We make sure we're packed. Our suitcases aren't too full. We don't carry anything that goes underneath the plane. We make sure that I don't get hungry because then I can't perform properly. We make sure that I'm at the theater at the right point in time. And we make sure that our eye is focused on the fact that it's a great privilege and it's very unlikely that we can do this. And so we thought, okay, that's the deal. And then we thought,